Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked. As ever, if you hit subscribe, we land in your feed automatically. Joining me, Rob Harris from Sky News as ever, Martyn Ziegler from The Times, and Tariq Panja from The New York Times. Tariq, you're in Trondheim.
Yep, in Trondheim, close to the North Pole than I was when I left. I see Trondheim for the Play the Game conference. Should be an interesting few days.
What's on the agenda there?
Governance, Rob, and how it can be made good.
Yeah, it must be pretty cold up there, close to the Arctic Circle, Tariq. Trondheim, Norway. My grandmother's Norwegian from not too far from Trondheim, so I know just how cold you probably are.
Well, that's where all the governance scrutiny is going on this week, but it's more of a time of celebration for FIFA. They're all in Miami at the moment. Gianni Infantino announcing just where the games will be for the 2026 World Cup with a live show on Sunday. So we know that the World Cup's going to open in Mexico. And that will, of course, be at the Aztec Stadium on June the 11th. Then we're going to get Canada's first game in Toronto on June the 12th. And who got the honour of being the US's first game? Well, that's Los Angeles on June the 12th as well. But it was all about who's going to get the World Cup final. And after much discussion, much jostling across the US, it will be on July the 19th at MetLife Stadium.
For styling it as New York, New Jersey, but actually it is in the state of New Jersey. Well, pretty close to New York. I think it's you can certainly get there fairly easily because that's where the New York Giants and the New York Jets both play, the American football teams. But what struck me about this announcement, I think we were regular listeners to the show would know that that was the favourite over Dallas, but was the sheer scale of this 48-team World Cup for the first time, 104 matches instead of 64. And this sort of huge group stage to get from 48 teams down to 32, it seems like a very protracted way of going about it. But I think once he decided on 48 teams, it was probably the only way.
Right. Just looking at the announcement there for the calendar finally for the World Cup, Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president, he described those as 104 Super Bowls. Those games are going to be that big. But as you say, Martyn, to have such a big group stage to eliminate just a handful of teams, is there going to be a worry there might be a fatigue through that group stage because the tournament's going to be so long? It's going to be, these games are going to be, could be a few one-sided. They're not going to be that much jeopardy or drama, perhaps.
Is it just going to be some like you in the media who grumble, who might have to cover all these games, whereas for TV viewers around the world, they're going to have the pick of being able to tune in to watch games all the time? Now, you might not watch them all, but often just having the option of being able to watch is something that you want. It's a bit like a buffet. You don't have everything, but you often like the sense of as a choice of lots of things.
Yeah, which is why we should have in the future, Rob, all 211 FIFA members in the World Cup, so the buffet is even bigger and we can watch football every day, maybe a 2-month World Cup.
That's now going to be clipped up at FIFA and put in the latest promo for the next campaign, making football truly global, endorsed by Tariq Panja.
Yep. Bring it on.
People who would thought that 32 was the sort of perfect number because it makes a very easy, clean tournament, I think they will be feeling fully justified on their views now. But I mean, imagine if it was a 48 team and the proposal that I came fairly close to sort of going to vote for the World Cup to be held every 2 years instead of every 4. Imagine that. That would just be madness.
When you say it, wonder about those who said a 32-team World Cup is the best thing. That was actually FIFA's own study after Gianni Infantino became FIFA president. It was the optimum sporting format.
That's right. When they proposed that biannual World Cup, there was that study. And guess what? 32 teams is a perfect tournament. So why did they change it? What was the point, just so for people to catch up on this? Why has it grown to 48 teams?
Well, it was an election pledge. In fact, Gianni Infantino's first interview of his campaign originally floated the idea of a 40-team World Cup. So certainly expansion was on the cards, as many had been talking about already. And I think it was wrapped into the reform process, wasn't it? Wasn't it a way of getting the reforms through after the sort of ousting of Sepp Blatter to expand the World Cup?
I mean, it's an easy political win. If you're looking for votes or you want to cement your position, you give more countries, more and certainly more confederations, more places at the World Cup. So if you're, CONCACAF covers North America, Central America, and the Caribbean, then if you can get 2 more places instead of sort of guaranteed 3, you get 5, and that's or 6 even. That's you think, oh, that's brilliant for us. But let's vote for that person who's saying that. So originally the proposal was to go to 40, and that could have been, I think, suggesting you could have had 8 groups of 5, and the top 2 would go through, which was in some ways would have remained fairly clean. But obviously 48, that's another, even more places you can give to people. So hooray, trebles all round.
One thing struck me about the whole show, it had very much a lighter tone. It was Kevin Hart and Jenny Taft who were presenting it. And I think we'd seen some quite serious, uptight shows for recent World Cups and announcements, taking themselves far too seriously. Yet this did seem unscripted in parts, didn't it? You think these things are heavily rehearsed, but there was some ad-libbing, discussing with Gianni Infantino what his favourite food was in Mexico, and then was it Kevin Hart then saying, "Oh, Mexican food can go through you a bit."
Yeah, I thought I was slightly disappointed. I thought Kevin Hart might be a bit funnier than he was, but at least he tried to sort of bring some levity to the situation. And it did seem to be lots of
raising
food.
the bar there. Are you going to try and tell some better jokes now? Challenge the comedian.
It would be impossible for me to be funny, I think. Look, I mean, lots of people remark on this. This is almost like listening to sort of some of the top comedy shows, listening to this podcast.
We've not mentioned yet. What about Gianni Infantino's outfit?
Well, you're a big fan of engagement. You think engagement's really important in this day and age. And I would say, looking at the social feeds, forget where the World Cup final is going to be played, the opening game of the Azteca. There was one thing that stole the show as far as social media was concerned. And we haven't had the big reveal. We don't know who styled the FIFA president or where it came from, but that hoodie blazer set the internet ablaze. So, Rob, as a fan of engagement and getting more people involved, what are your thoughts?
Well, it was a beige combo, wasn't it? He certainly got himself talked about. Is it better to be talked about than not at all? He got his image shared around. Whose image was shared around more from that draw announcement? It was Gianni Infantino. He was there front and centre. And, maybe he's just trying to be a bit more relaxed. How would we have thought if he turned up wearing a full suit for that show?
Well, I would have thought, there's the FIFA president. That's what he's supposed to look like. Well, it's interesting now. So we're going to say, like, he set the bar here. The next time on a hot day, we're going to see him in Bermudas and a Hawaiian shirt. Where does this go?
Remember, he wore the Volunteers hoodie at the 2018 World Cup in Russia.
Yeah.
The journalist at the time, Richard Conway from the BBC, asked him about it. Now very much in PR himself.
Yes, absolutely. That went down very well, if I remember right.
Yeah, well, maybe I had this sort of thinking, what should I wear? Hoodie, suit. Oh, I know. Let's wear a suit with a hoodie, which is part of the actual outfit.
You mean the hood suit combo? You haven't heard of that? It's been out for a while, see. It's what all the cool kids are wearing.
I have Googled it. I think there are some fashion designers who do it for crazy amounts of money. Probably out of my price range and out of my style range.
We'll watch out for that official stylist to the FIFA president. Maybe that'll be the next role coming up at FIFA in Miami.
Can I just say credit to whoever also colour coordinated the lapel mic that matched the colour of the hoodie. So whoever you are, great job. Tremendous.
So much to look forward to for 2026. So many talking points. Then there's the 3-continent, 6-nation World Cup in 2030. And then in terms of the Men's World Cup, we look ahead to the 2034 tournament. That will be in Saudi Arabia, and more developments there this week.
More and more money being pushed into various different sports, but maybe not everyone, because there have been reports that they're looking to buy 3 Premiership rugby teams in England, or certainly invest in them. But speaking to representatives of the Saudi Public Investment Fund in the UK, they say that actually that's not going to happen. So far, rugby union looks like it's untouched at the moment.
Cross that one off the list, but golf. And a very familiar name, part of a golf deal this week.
Yes, John Henry and FSG, the owners of Liverpool Football Club in the Premier League, Boston Red Sox, I think Pittsburgh Penguins as well, backing a group that is going to be an investor into the PGA. The PGA, of course, had that deal on the table that hasn't fully been signed off, Rob, with the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, still many negotiations within the world of golf trying to thrash out a deal, how that will look. And of course, still more golfers signing up to the live circuit as well, ever since John Rahm led the new influx. But perhaps in this January transfer window, we've not been talking as much about Saudi spending, have we, in football terms?
Certainly not about Saudi spending. There's been hardly any transfers, and in fact, not many transfers at all for various reasons. I'm not quite sure why the Saudis haven't been particularly active. Maybe the sort of star names that they were trying to attract have already been snapped up or have got other plans.
We'll get later into why the Premier League also hasn't been spending as much, all about perhaps the new enforcement of the profit sustainability rules. So that's all still to come, as well as a look ahead to the Paris 2024 Olympics, issues involving Russia and doping, of course, an anti-racism event I went to, and just what's been going on in the press boxes at the African Cup of Nations. But the UEFA and everything been gearing up to a big battle by the federations about statute changes at the top of European football, about the future of Alexander Shevrin. But it looks like everyone's back down and there's peace looming ahead of the Congress in Paris.
Well, it looks like some what could have been public opposition at the Congress from Romania has sort of disappeared. They say they're going to happy to back the statute. So, I mean, it now looks unlikely that people are going to publicly oppose this proposal to sort of allow Alexander Shevrin to run for another term as president and other members of the executive committee to stay on longer. But I don't think that's going to be the end of the story, perhaps. I think there's still going to be issues and questions around it. Do you think, Tariq? You've been writing on this?
I have. I've been looking into this, and we can get bogged down in the weeds, and it can sound boring when you use words like governance, term limits, statutes, and they are quite boring. But the reality is this is, I guess, a look at character and power at these sports governing bodies, in this case, UEFA. And I just want to look back at what Alexander Shevrin said when he first came in 2016 and why he came in. If you remember, there was a massive scandal, Michel Platini removed, and this guy we'd never really heard of, Alexander Shevrin, arrives and is a kind of a fresh face and new look at football. And I remember an interview my colleague, Rory Smith, had done with Shevrin just a few months after he'd taken over. And it's important we quote what Shevrin said at the time because of where we are now. He asked him, "How long do you want to stay?" And this is the quote. He said, "The maximum is 3 terms after the Congress. But I will lead by example. And I will say that this 2.5 years, by that he means the ones he's just taken over from Platini, is already 1 term for me." And he says, we've got to show. And the words straight away say, we've got to show that we're different, essentially. And here we are now, several years, 6-7 years after that. And suddenly those words seem a little hollow, because if you ask him today, he's not sure if he gets a chance to run for a 4th term. It seems he might, and he probably will. And this is the big question. It doesn't matter what the rules and the regulations are, isn't it? About what you offer, from a kind of personal perspective, leadership, etc. And that's what David Gill, Ziegs, who was talking about when he raised his voice about this in December.
Of course, David Gill, though, without an actual vote in the Congress, because he sits on the EXCO, but it's the member associations who have the Congress vote, the 55 of them, of course, still including Russia, despite the fact their teams are banned from playing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, David Gill, I think, made the point in that EXCO meeting that actually the proposals would allow him to stay on for like 2 extra terms, but he's not going to do so. He's going to finish in 2025 when his 12 years is up. So I think that's the point he made. Shevrin has said in a couple of interviews that he's not sure what he's going to do and he feels tired. So I think the ball is very much in his court.
Well, the ball is in his court, but he could just say, you know what, we might have to do this for legal reasons, but I will count the term, like he said in when he first joined, and all of this kind of goes away. Just back to David Gill before we move on. That meeting in December was quite fractious because he made his point and Alexander Shevrin retorted. And this is a UEFA EXCO, so really a closed-door meeting. But because there's so much, I guess, a little bit of disharmony about this, that word seeped out. And at the end, David Gill said to Alexander Shevrin, if we're going to resort to legal aspects or measures, then I think it's wrong. It's about the spirit of the rules. You were elected before the statutes changed. You were the president before the statutes changed. Then the statutes were very clear at the time that a part term is a full term. And he compared the new FIFA and the new UEFA to the bad FIFA and the bad old UEFA, and he hoped things had moved on. And that's really important here. Whatever these kind of legal statutes and the kind of in the weeds discussions, it's a question of character.
And as we look at what Shevrin said, he said, of course, he might not stand for another term in 2027. I wonder if playing into his mind could be beyond all the wider discussion on statutes. If he says now that's it in 2027, is he a lame duck until then in terms of what you can get through? Because people are starting to plan for the future and you have your power diminished in some way. Obviously, take beyond sport, there are certain countries like the United States that have term limits. So you know, a second-term president when his or she maybe one day is leaving office. Whereas obviously in the UK, there are no term limits. So they do keep that element of surprise in terms of when they step down. Although, beyond all that, saying all this, the statutes do set out when you should technically be leaving office now in UEFA and FIFA.
Yeah, I mean, that lame duck aspect is, I think, I have seen that mentioned about other things. For example, Jacques Rogge, when he was the IOC president, towards the end of his tenure there, which was also the London 2012 Olympics was, I think, the year before he stepped down. And I think there was definitely a feeling that he felt that people within the organisation were sort of already looking past him. So maybe that is an aspect.
I guess we'll see about that. But the point of the statutes, we talk about lame ducks, that they were there, and Gianni Infantino, of course, quietly got the FIFA statutes changed in 2018. So his first partial term didn't count as well. The point of those is, after scandal, you don't want to create presidents that become omnipowerful. And Gianni Infantino, for example, was someone who was on the reform committee that added these statutes for this very reason. This, if you talk to people from the outside, even talk to people from the inside, this is a bit of recidivism, isn't it? It's going back to the past. We should have moved on here. And in terms of, does it stop you getting things done? He's been president. We can. This is for another show that we could do a review about what has been done and what hasn't been done from those days while they've been president. I think it's very different to the normal political world. Don't forget, in a general election, there are a lot more voters than 55 national associations when it comes to UEFA. It's probably the narrowest constituency you need to get things done and to have an election. That creates a lot of opportunity for power to coalesce into the hands of powerful presidents.
I think we've also talked about on here in the past, these football leaders seem to have a lot to do at the moment. I don't know if because it was followed less, there always seems to be things constantly to decide on. Competition changes, new competitions. We're just imagining there's a lot more to do, or is it they're creating more to do in terms of calendar changes, expansion of events, reformatting events, constant readjustments, or is it a reflection of the growth of the men's game and particularly the women's game too, that just more needs to be done?
I think we have had a period of big change. So that's so if you think about the new Champions League format, the new Club World Cup, and this sort of this wrestling match for power and money and influence in football, I think that has been a significant thing. And you've got the European Super League in the background as well. So I think that's why it has been a particularly sort of feverish time. I do think things are going to sort of settle down now. We've got the sort of World Cup basically organised up until 2034, the Euros up until 2032. So actually there isn't that much more to decide in football. So I'm not quite sure why people are so desperate to stay on for ages and ages and ages beyond the original terms.
I was just counting my lame duck point there in terms of you can be a lame duck if actually you don't really need to get people around a particular decision. But you ask why people want to stay on. It's a pretty nice gig, isn't it, for some people to be associated with some of the most famous people in the world, some of the most powerful people in the world you get to mix with, and you're producing and overseeing the sporting events that everyone wants to be watching all year round in the case of UEFA, because you've got the Champions League too, as well as the Euros.
Rob, that's exactly the point, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about salaries, in Sheffrin's case, about $3 million. Infantino's a little bit over $4 million. Those salaries have gone up in the time they've been there. You've got the luxury travel, often private jets. You're rubbing shoulders, as you said, with some of the most powerful human beings in the world. And the pressure isn't the same as if you're a world leader, even if others would like to say it is. What a great gig. And you just have to keep your national federations happy. And how do you do that? You control these development grants, whether it's the hat-trick program at UEFA or the forward program at FIFA, and you get voted in over and over again. And it just reminds me of just one other thing Sheffrin said in the interview back when he was first elected in 2017. He said these term limits are good because, first of all, an organization like this needs new ideas and you can become sleepy. And then he also made the point you made. He said it's for the first time that he's had people waiting for him everywhere, red carpets, suites that he doesn't need, that people bowing and scraping towards you. It was something that you shouldn't get used to. And maybe that's a reason to have these term limits. Well, at least he thought that then.
Yeah, obviously they don't have the same magnitude of decision making as some world leaders, but there are still, I've heard in the past, like at major events, at finals, when suddenly they're presented with security risks and they have to make decisions. Do we go ahead with it? Do we not? Well, we know what happened then in Paris as well at the Champions League final in 22. Decisions there when obviously a lot of people's safety is at stake. And as we, wrap this up, we'll get on to Formula One a bit later on because of the big Lewis Hamilton move, I expect. Look at Bernie Ecclestone. He was in charge of Formula One for years and years, decades. He left in 2017 finally. And after Liberty took over, he then saw how fresh blood was necessary to open the sport up to new audiences, look at new ways of engagement, new broadcasting ways, reaching out to new audiences. And it needed that sort of fresh leadership there. Football, I don't think, is anyway in the same situation as needing revitalising like that. But you do see actually where change can benefit any sport.
Yeah, I think everybody would agree that Bernie Ecclestone outstayed is welcome there.
Well, you mentioned Sheffrin's salary, dwarfed completely by the salaries of footballers themselves, although not many this month have managed to get vast new deals, have they? What, Premier League clubs, it was about 16 permanent deals they did, spent 95 million overall on transfers compared to 700 million plus last January, although that was heavily influenced by Todd Bowley and at Chelsea. But it has been the lowest January spending, I think, for a decade or so, which obviously is counted against the fact there was record spending in the summer, and it isn't overall season spending though.
Yeah, I think there's a few factors here. I think obviously one is the sort of crackdown on the profit and sustainability rules. Everton, Nottingham Forest charged. I think that's been a wake-up call. Perhaps in the past the Premier League hasn't been quite as vigilant in enforcing its own rules, but they are now. So we've had Manchester United, Newcastle United, both raising those as issues, the rules. And also Kieran Maguire, the football finance author, he pointed out actually the amount of money owed by Premier League clubs for transfers outstanding is at £2 billion. So there's a lot of money on credit. They've got basically bought players on credit. They need to pay those off. That's a big debt. So if you got that in the background, you're perhaps going to be a bit more reluctant.
Yeah, just want to pick you up on Manchester United there. They did. Eric Ten Hag did mention that, but I think that is more the Glazers not putting money in. I was reading somewhere else that they could have a ceiling of 125 million more because the way the PSR works, some degree of equity investment allows that to get to 105 million over 3 years. The United cap might be a bit lower because the Glazers have not put any money into the club into getting to that 35 million a year threshold. That's the difference. So United could spend if the Glazers were willing to open their wallets. And the other thing I heard is maybe clubs are just better run these days. January is a desperate marketplace. If you've got a good squad, if you are looking to either stay up or whatever you're trying to do, if you've got a plan, maybe you don't need to make impulse purchase in January. Maybe that is part of it, as well as the PSR and all of these things. It's probably a combination of things at this point.
Let's just run through the European numbers, courtesy of Deloitte in pound terms. The top spenders in Europe in this January window: Liga, £163 million, €191 million. That Serie A on £86 million, La Liga and Bundesliga both around £70 million. And we're still waiting to know what punishment Nottingham Forest will get for their breach of PSR regulations. Also, Everton with their second charge as well. It was interesting this week being at Nottingham Forest with Evangelos Marinakis, the owner, the Greek shipping magnate, and did get to spend a bit of time with him at an anti-racism conference they were hosting.
Well, Marinakis, big personality, owns Olympiakos in Greece, famously threw away his lanyard after walking out of a game at Fulham at half-time with his team in a bad state there. What was it like coming up and chatting and spending a bit of time with Marinakis? Did you get into the PSR stuff?
You know something? It's always one of those challenges journalistically when you're there for something of another cause, and particularly something as important as racism. And we can get on to discussing what happened at the event. How much do you bring up the other matters? Was another journalist who mentioned the comment from Richard Masters the other week at the Parliamentary Select Committee, the Premier League chief executive, suggesting Forest are a small club. Got to say, we were doing this meeting with the 2 European Cups just around the corner. So a reminder of just actually what heritage Forest do have. And he certainly took very unkindly to how he was dismissed. Although I did wonder about that exchange, whether it was just he was overly thinking at Richard Masters and sort of stumbled into it accidentally, however sort of clumsy it was.
Yeah, not here to be defending Richard Masters, but you don't think that the chief executive of the Premier League would go out of his way to describe two of his teams as small teams out of malice. For one, it's just massively unprofessional. Two, commercially, it's not great to say that these aren't big teams. And three, factually, it would be incorrect. So I think it became almost a bigger story than it should have, and maybe the MPs not afraid to enjoy a bit of grandstanding.
And a bit of a focus on the Russian embassy.
Yeah, this is in response to Kamila Valieva, the 15-year-old Russian figure skater who got a 4-year doping ban. And the Russian embassy in South Africa posted this very controversial message with a picture of Valieva saying doping ? And then underneath that, pictures of Simone Biles and Serena Williams, and with the tag cereals, i.e. saying that you can be confused over why Valieva should be done for doping, and effectively smearing these 2 American sports people, suggesting that they are too, which we've had Travis Tygart of the US Anti-Doping Agency saying it's a disgusting, pathetic attempt to smear them, and the IOC have said it's unacceptable as well. And I think after about 8 hours, the embassy took it down. But I think they're basically using diversion tactics to try and take the pressure off them, because I think the issue is the coaches, the medical staff, nothing's happened to them.
No.
And a lot of questions over why a 15-year-old at the time of the offence is being held liable.
Yeah, just on that tweet, guys, there was also the fact that there was some sort of people felt there were some racist undertones as well with both of the athletes that they picked being black, and that was outrageous, the reaction to that. And the story itself, Rob, is an awful one in terms of Valieva, who was just 15, is that right, at the time of the Beijing Olympics?
Yeah, that's right. 15 then. And this was following a test that she'd had, I think, a month before that Olympics. So very, very sad for her, because you'd think most 15-year-olds aren't going out to try and enhance their performance by taking banned substances, but their coaches might be giving them things. So I think that's the big issue here.
And often these cases, it's quite clear-cut, isn't it? One member of the team is banned for doping, then as a team you lose the gold medal, don't you? But not quite simple as that, is it?
No, this was really bizarre, actually, the sequence of events. So Valieva's, I guess, defeat and Russia's defeat at the Court of Arbitration for Sport, that came on last Monday. But then it took 24 hours for the International Skating Union and the IOC to offer a proper reply to what had happened. So the court had said she needs to be disqualified of all of the competitions she'd taken part in since giving the sample for the failed drugs test. So that's December 2021. So that meant you would have thought that the team event that Russia took part in, Russia would, in most people's eyes, would have been disqualified. But that's not what happened. What the ISU, the skating union, decided was they would just shave off Valieva's points. So what did that mean? It meant the United States came first and eventually named in that gold medal seat. Japan moved up to silver from bronze. And the Canadians, who finished fourth, expecting the bronze medal, were shocked to find that Russia were given the bronze medal because all the other Russian points counted, and the points that Valieva lost were not given to the other competitors. So, i.e., the person who got 9 points didn't get 10, and the person who got 8 points didn't get 9, and so on. And that meant Russia got the bronze. And cue chaos and mayhem and anger from the Canadians, Rob.
Yeah, of course, there wasn't even technically a Russian team competing at the 2022 Olympics in Beijing. They were the ROC, standing for Russian Olympic Committee. And again, for the Paris Games, they are going to be competing only as neutrals. This time, not because of the doping sanctions, of which, remember, it was the ban for the cover-up of the cover-up. Now it's, of course, over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, just one of the many issues that's going to be hanging over the 2024 Games. And this week, I had a chance to see the CEO of the Games, Etienne Thurbeau, and you just get a sense of what a packed agenda he's got and just how many issues are quite confronting him as he prepares for these Games, most notably domestically around the unions, then the security threat as well.
Yeah, Rob, as you said, it's what a interesting time, what a difficult time to host an Olympics. You sat down there with Etienne Thurbeau and maybe some of his team members. What struck you as the most important, most urgent things from what he had to say?
He said they seem to have assurances from the unions that they're not going to disrupt the Games, but as we were speaking, there were farmers effectively blockading Paris in one of their many protests. I mean, we do have to counter this with, so often in the build-up to the Games, in any country, we talk about the worst-case scenarios. If you think a year before London 2012, there were the riots in London, which led to fears that they're going to use the Games to exploit the situation to protest, but those riots seem to be very much a certain particular spark. In 2011, we thought there might be disorder around the Rio Olympics because we'd seen some in recent years in Rio and other parts of Brazil, as well as sort of crime and disorder, but that didn't then materialize. So weighing up against that, but there certainly are, of course, issues in France with the way unions do exert themselves to try to get the best deal. And then, of course, we have the ongoing security threat, and that's not just due to current instability in the Middle East and so many new strands of the wars there, but also the fact they've got this opening ceremony that's going to be right the way through the centre of Paris, down the Seine, which will be absolutely spectacular if it all goes off according to plan.
Yeah, Rob, that opening ceremony is the one that is supposed to be the wow standout moment the Games have opened. First time that an Olympics has not had, at least in any living memory, an opening ceremony taking place in an enclosed stadium. A flotilla of boats down the Seine past iconic Paris site, but also past all of those windows, all open up. The security challenge has been under scrutiny since the moment they announced that plan, and even more so now. What did he have to say? Did he seem comfortable, relaxed? This is going to happen? Don't worry, guys.
You have to factor in when we ask these questions, they're not suddenly going to reveal some new intelligence or security issues. So it can be quite boilerplate, but of course saying we're not going to take any risks, but in no way wanting to veer from the plan or suggest they would scrap it all and move into the Stade de France. But I mean, surely it's implausible to think there isn't some plan to have to move it all to the Stade de France, because as we've seen with the COVID effect of the Olympics, that you always have to have plan Bs.
Yeah, and just to go into a little bit of detail on what that looks like, this is still going to be a ticketed affair with very expensive tickets on the lower bank of the Seine available for purchase, and then there's also going to be the free entry, or the public part for the Parisians. They still have to register and get tickets as well, just for crowd control. So they're going to try and close that on the upper bank. Free tickets, lower bank, expensive tickets, and then you hope for the best. I'm sure they've got a lot of security plans. It's going to be the highest level of security. I'm just very intrigued. It'll be exciting to see this. Let's hope it goes off without any hitches.
Last year, they suggested 600,000 could be expected at the opening ceremony. Just this week, French Interior Minister saying the idea will be 100,000 people on the lower quays, that's the paying tickets, and more than 200,000 people on the upper quays, and they'll have the free tickets. But this 6-kilometre route is going to be causing a lot of challenges for them. And this start of the year has been dominated by the African Cup of Nations and the Asian Cup in particular. Quite a lot of excitement, helped by these very long matches, so much added time where we've seen dramatic comebacks and teams fighting back and recovering themselves to carry themselves through. And at the time of recording and the AFCON, the Ivory Coast story has been incredible, ditching their coach in the middle of the tournament, getting them all the way through to the semi-finals. But one of the things that's struck us about AFCON has been the focus on the press boxes.
Yeah, there's been a number of incidents and statements coming out when Ghana, I remember Ghana being, shuffled out of the tournament without making much of a mark. There was this almost felt like I don't know if they came to physical blows, but certainly words exchanged between members of the media and the defeated Ghanaian squad. It's the sort of thing you don't see. Then there was this incident later on with more warnings about press conduct because people were taking their shirts off in celebration inside the press box. It's quite difficult to understand how this happens. But the idea of who is classified maybe as press, who goes into these press boxes, that has changed over the years maybe, and that has an impact, Rob.
I feel we could do a whole pod on this. So we get a lot of people working for federations or for clubs in press boxes. So they're doing the job of supplying club media, for example. So they will be partisan and, they can obviously feel the joy if they're winning. The question is, should they tone it down a bit? You see them sort of celebrating perhaps quite naturally. And, we're not here to strip the emotion out of sport, obviously, but there are people doing their job journalistically in the press boxes. And of course, any minute you could be switching to something, far more serious, far more about accountability and questioning.
It's also, if you're working on deadline in those atmospheres, which the three of us have over the years, in our time of having to actually do the match coverage, it's very stressful actually to have to provide copy on the whistle and all the rest of it. The last thing you need is someone jumping up and down next to you or banging on the table. And there's also this new element, Rob, of influencers. And part of their kind of reason to be is to make some of that emotion and to create content, lively content for their social feeds.
Can be a blurring because some influencers are used by established media outlets as well as to bring in new audiences and engagement as well and new readership. So, some influencers as well can perhaps move more into the journalistic sphere. Some journalists can end up moving more into the influencer world. And I think that's often characterized by positivity, not wanting to say anything that's questioning or naturally negative, because that influencer engagement can often be, in football terms, about positivity. So you see that a lot around, say, transfers, and it's about access at times as well to get that information.
Often about that, and not for any particular need of access. Can I just say something positive about this year's AFCON, and something that the games have been obviously very dramatic, a lot of last-minute goals, lots of goals, which is a rarity. But something that that struck me as really interesting is how many competitive teams there are now. And there's this one stat, Rob, you ready? So 8 quarterfinalists at the last AFCON. All 8 didn't make the quarterfinals this year. 8 new quarterfinalists from a tournament that last took place. I don't think that's happened in any major competition that I can think of in recent times, for sure.
Brilliant in terms of competitive balance and shown that there's always an opportunity for teams. But, those countries have gone out early who've been absolute disarray, questioning why they've gone home so early. Yeah, we've seen it with teams, haven't we? Ghana, one of them, an absolute outcry about the state of their team. But certainly for the overall picture of African football, it's pretty good. We saw it at the last Men's World Cup with Morocco through to the semi-finals the first time. We saw it at the Women's World Cup. Obviously, the first time winner was Spain, and new countries going through there as well. And, take the Men's Champions League, for instance. How often do we see the same head-to-heads coming up in the latter stages? We think, oh, didn't we have this last year or the year before? So, I always like a feel-good story as well, particularly at something like AFCON or a Euros, where it's a team sort of progressing for the first time, and you see the impact, what it means for the fans back home as well.
Absolutely. And, the emotion, national team football, jeopardy, competitive balance, it's what sport is for, really, in a way, at that elite level, not just the same old faces, that risk making the competitions essentially dour eventually. But there's been nothing dour about this event. So it's been a real boon for African football, I'd say.
Approaching the final games of the AFCON and the Asian Cup as well. That about brings an end to this week's episode of Sport Unlocked. As ever, if you hit subscribe, we land in your feed automatically, and you can message us at Sport Unlocked on X, Facebook and Instagram. For now, goodbye.